For 26 days, the Gulf had a ceasefire. For 26 days, the missile alerts in the United Arab Emirates went quiet. Schools reopened. Children walked back into classrooms for the first time since February. Oil tankers crept back into the lanes. And Tehran whispered through diplomats about a long peace. Then, in the span of 3.5 hours on May 4th, Iran fired 4 cruise missiles at the UAE, sent 2 drones into an ADNOC oil tanker as it transited the Strait of Hormuz, and watched a fireball erupt at the most strategically important petroleum facility in the entire Persian Gulf. 3 Indian oil workers were rushed to a hospital. 5 emergency alerts shrieked across Emirati phones in less than 4 hours. And what almost no one outside Tel Aviv and Abu Dhabi knew at that moment was this: an Israeli Iron Dome battery deployed in absolute secrecy onto Emirati soil since the opening days of the war was already in the air defending Arab cities. The first time in history that an IDF interceptor had ever fired in defense of an Arab state. We're going to walk you through every minute of this attack, the hidden Israeli system that just went hot for the first time ever in an Arab country, the ADNOC tanker named Barakah, that became Tehran's message to Donald Trump, and the chain reaction that's now pulling the United States straight back into the Strait of Hormuz with 100 aircraft and 15,000 troops. And by the end, you're going to understand exactly why Tehran picked this moment, exactly what Iran got wrong about the UAE's air defense, and exactly why this could be the end of the ceasefire. Now let's start with what actually happened hour by hour on Monday, May 4th. According to the UAE Ministry of Defense, in a statement posted to X on Monday afternoon, 4 cruise missiles were detected being launched from Iranian territory and tracked toward various targets across the Emirates. 3 of them were intercepted over UAE territorial waters. The 4th fell into the sea. Within a few minutes, the country's emergency alert system, which had been silent since the April 8th ceasefire, fired off 5 separate warnings in 3.5 hours. Residents were told to find shelter, stay away from windows, and rely only on official sources. Then, almost simultaneously, the second wave landed. The Fujairah media office confirmed in an official statement that a large fire had broken out at the Fujairah Oil Industry Zone, known as FOIZ, after a drone strike originating from Iran. Civil defense teams deployed within minutes. And, as Bloomberg later confirmed, citing people familiar with the matter, the specific terminal hit was the VTTI facility jointly owned by IFEM Global Infrastructure Fund, the Vital Group, and Abu Dhabi National Energy Company. 3 Indian nationals working at the site were rushed to hospital with moderate injuries. But that's just the beginning, because at the exact same time the FOIZ facility was burning 2 Iranian drones slammed into a crude oil tanker named Barakah, owned and operated by ADNOC Logistics and Services, as it tried to transit the Strait of Hormuz off the coast of Oman. ADNOC confirmed the strike publicly. No injuries. The vessel was not carrying cargo at the time. And the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the attack a flagrant violation of international law and an act of piracy by Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Gulf Cooperation Council issued a joint condemnation within hours. So did Egypt. So did Kuwait. By Monday evening, both the UAE Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research had announced that schools, nurseries, and universities across the country would shift back to distance learning from Tuesday, May 5th through Friday, May 8th. Emergency posture on a national scale. And here's where things get even more serious. According to data released by the UAE Defense Ministry on Monday and reported by Gulf News, since the start of Iran's strikes on February 28th, the country's air defense systems have now intercepted 549 ballistic missiles, 29 cruise missiles, and 2,260 drones. That is one of the largest aerial bombardment defenses any single nation has ever conducted in modern history. And on Monday alone, that running total grew by 12 ballistic missiles, 3 cruise missiles, and 4 drones, all engaged and tracked. The UAE has been, as Al Jazeera noted, the most heavily targeted country in Iran's retaliatory campaign. And the question every single Pentagon analyst is now asking is the same question: how, after 26 days of ceasefire, did Tehran decide that the moment to break it was right now? The answer takes us into the first scenario of why this matters. The first thing you have to understand is the geography of Fujairah, because Fujairah is not an accident. Fujairah is the strategic crown jewel of the entire Emirati energy network. It sits on the Gulf of Oman on the eastern coast of the UAE outside the Strait of Hormuz. It is the terminus of the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline A1. 5 million barrel per day artery, roughly 360 kilometers long, or about 224 miles, built specifically so that Emirati oil could reach world markets without ever passing through the Iranian-controlled choke point. Think about that for a moment. The Emiratis spent billions of dollars laying pipe across the desert for one reason and one reason only: to take their oil out of the range of Iranian missiles, Iranian fast boats, and Iranian mines. Fujairah was designed, engineered, and constructed for one purpose: to defeat Iran's ability to weaponize the Strait of Hormuz. And on May 4th, Iran said something very clear by hitting it. Tehran said, "Your bypass is not a bypass. Your insurance policy is on fire. Your strategic depth is within drone range. Your billions of dollars of pipeline engineering, your decades of planning, your entire architecture for surviving an Iranian blockade, none of it stops a Shahed-class drone flying low over the Gulf of Oman." Now, that's not even the worst part for Abu Dhabi. The Fujairah Oil Industry Zone hosts massive crude storage tanks, refineries, bunkering terminals, and fuel trading operations used by global energy companies. According to the Wikipedia compilation of incidents during the 2026 war, Fujairah has now been struck repeatedly. Back in March, drone strikes triggered fires that forced Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, or ADNOC, to shut down a refinery capable of producing 922,000 barrels per day. That is more output than entire mid-sized OPEC nations. To put that number in perspective, 922,000 barrels per day is roughly equivalent to the entire production of Norway, or about 1% of total global oil supply, all coming from a single facility that Iranian drones can hit. Each time the FOIZ burns, global oil prices move. Each time those tanks rupture, insurance markets reprice the entire Gulf. Lloyd's of London raises war risk premiums. Tankers reroute. Shipping companies eat the cost. And Iran knows this with mathematical precision. So when a Shahed-class drone, likely a Shahed 136 loitering munition, the same model Tehran has been mass-producing for 2 years, and the same model Russia has been buying by the hundreds, slipped through whatever interception layer was protecting Fujairah on Monday and lit the FOIZ on fire. This was not random. This was a strategic message about choke points written in burning crude oil. But there's an even bigger issue behind all of this. And that brings us to the second scenario, the one that almost no one is talking about. Because the secret weapon defending the UAE on Monday was not Emirati. It was Israeli. According to a scoop published by Axios on April 26, citing 2 senior Israeli officials, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu personally ordered the Israel Defense Forces to deliver an Iron Dome battery complete with Tamir interceptors and several dozen IDF operators to the United Arab Emirates after a direct phone call with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The deployment happened in the opening days of the war. It was the first time in history that Israel had ever sent an Iron Dome battery to another country. It was the first time the system had ever been operated outside the United States and Israel. And it was the first time the system had ever fired its interceptors in defense of an Arab state. Think about the historic weight of that for a moment. For decades, Iron Dome was Israel's most jealously guarded national asset. Tel Aviv refused to send it to Ukraine. Tel Aviv refused requests from European partners. And then, in February 2026, Netanyahu picked up the phone, called Mohammed bin Zayed, and put the system on a transport plane to Abu Dhabi. According to the Axios report, the battery has intercepted dozens of Iranian missiles since arriving. According to follow-up reporting by the Times of Israel citing the Financial Times, Israel also deployed additional unspecified weapon systems and provided real-time intelligence on Iranian launches heading toward the Gulf. One source described the deployment in plain language. It's not a small number of boots on the ground, and it didn't stop with Iron Dome. According to defense analysts, citing sources at Elbit Systems and Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, Israel also transferred its Spectro drone detection system, a lightweight surveillance platform capable of tracking unmanned aerial vehicles at ranges up to 20 kilometers or roughly 12.4 miles, and even a deployable version of the Iron Beam high-energy laser, Rafael's directed energy interceptor, that only entered operational service in Israel in December 2025. So when Iranian missiles came in on Monday, what was looking back at them was not just the UAE's existing layered shield of Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, batteries and Patriot interceptors. It was an integrated Israeli-Emirati architecture with Israeli operators at consoles inside Arab territory, processing Israeli radar feeds from the EL/M2084 multi-mission radar, firing Israeli Tamir interceptors, all working in concert with the Emirati THAAD that had already made history in January 2022, when it conducted its first-ever combat intercept against a Houthi ballistic missile. According to Defense Security Asia, Iran launched roughly 550 ballistic and cruise missiles and more than 2,200 drones at the UAE during the war, and the Iron Dome battery's job was specifically to absorb the lower altitude, shorter range, and mass volume threats that would otherwise drain higher-end interceptors. That is the saturation problem the Pentagon has been wargaming for years. A single THAAD interceptor costs around $12.7 million. A single Patriot PAC-3 round costs roughly $4 million. A Tamir interceptor for Iron Dome somewhere between $40,000 and $100,000 per shot. Iran's strategy was to drown the UAE's high-end interceptors in a sea of cheap Shahed drones and then push ballistic missiles through the gaps. Tel Aviv and Abu Dhabi quietly built the answer together, and Tehran did not see it coming until Monday afternoon, when the Tamir interceptors lit up the Gulf sky over Fujairah, and 3 of 4 cruise missiles came down before they reached their targets. But before we get to that, this is a quick reminder that you're watching The Military Show. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. So hit that subscribe button to ensure you stay ahead of the curve. Now let's move on to the third scenario, and perhaps the most dangerous of them all. Because Iran did not just hit the UAE on Monday, Iran hit the United States. On Sunday, May 3rd, President Donald Trump announced an operation called Project Freedom, an effort to escort hundreds of commercial vessels stranded in the Persian Gulf out through the Strait of Hormuz. According to U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, the mission would involve more than 100 aircraft and 15,000 troops. To put that in context, 15,000 troops is more than an entire Marine Expeditionary Unit, or MEU. It is closer to the size of a full division equivalent forward presence in a contested waterway. The Joint Maritime Information Center, or JMIC, set up an enhanced security zone and began advising ships to coordinate with Omani authorities. The American message was clear: freedom of navigation restored. Tehran's response was equally clear. On Monday, Major General Pilot Ali Abdullahi, head of the Iranian Military Command, announced on state broadcaster ERIB, "We warn that any foreign military force, especially the aggressive U.S. military that intends to approach or enter the Strait of Hormuz, will be targeted." And then Iran did something even more provocative. According to Iranian state media, 2 Iranian missiles struck a U.S. frigate in the Strait of Hormuz after it ignored warnings from Iran's Navy to halt. CENTCOM and the U.S. military denied any vessel was hit. But the message had already been sent, and President Trump posted on Truth Social Iran has taken some shots at unrelated nations with respect to the ship movement Project Freedom, including a South Korean cargo ship. Trump warned that if Iran hit U.S. ships, Iran would, in his words, be blown off the face of the earth. The IDF, meanwhile, went to high readiness. And the USS frigate that Iran claimed to have hit denied by CENTCOM, but loud enough to ripple through every defense ministry from Tokyo to Riyadh. So, what does this all mean? The fourth scenario, and the one that closes the loop on every other one, is that Iran is now fighting a 3-front escalation simultaneously. Front 1 is economic. By striking the ADNOC tanker, Barakah Tehran is telling ADNOC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, and global insurers that no Emirati flag is safe in the strait. According to ADNOC Logistics and Services, the Barakah was struck by 2 drones off the coast of Oman. About 25 tankers left Iran in April. 7 were turned back. 2 were seized by U.S. forces. The shipping market is already pricing in war. Lloyd's underwriters, according to industry trackers, have already begun categorizing Strait of Hormuz transit as a critical risk zone with the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Agency, or UKMTO, advising mariners that passing close to the usual routes should be considered extremely hazardous due to the presence of mines that have not been fully surveyed and mitigated. Front 2 is military. By breaking the ceasefire and lighting up Fujairah, Iran is testing whether the Iron Dome and THAAD layered shield can hold under sustained pressure for a second time. The first time was the original 40-day campaign, where Iran launched more than 100 waves of missiles and drones, and the UAE Defense Ministry confirmed engagement of 549 ballistic missiles, 29 cruise missiles, and 2,260 drones in total. The second test is now. And every interceptor fired is one less interceptor in the magazine. The Wall Street Journal previously reported that even Israel's own anti-missile stockpiles had been pushed past their limits during the war, forcing the IDF to ration its most advanced rounds. If that pressure is now landing on the UAE again, Iran's calculation is simple. At some point, the magazines run dry. Front 3 is political. By daring the United States to escort ships under Project Freedom, Tehran is forcing Washington to either back down and lose enormous credibility in the eyes of every Gulf partner or commit forces that will inevitably take fire. The Iranian state news agency IRNA called Trump's effort in their own state broadcast language part of his delirium. That is not the language of a regime looking for off-ramps. That is the language of a regime testing escalation dominance. And here's the bottom line on all three fronts. Iran is gambling that Trump blinks. The signs are pointing toward a U.S. response anyway. CENTCOM has 100 aircraft already moving. Patriot batteries across Gulf states are at maximum readiness. Israeli and Emirati radar networks are now sharing live tracks. The Saudi Air Force has reportedly increased combat air patrols. Egypt has condemned the strike. Kuwait has condemned the strike. Qatar's emir has personally called Mohammed bin Zayed to express solidarity. The Sunni Arab world is with rare unanimity lining up behind the UAE. And the regime in Tehran is finding that the more it strikes, the more its remaining diplomatic options collapse. What this means for Tehran is catastrophic. Their gamble has put them once again in direct confrontation with not one but three simultaneous adversaries, the UAE Israel, operating from Emirati soil, and the United States. Their economy is already crumbling under sanctions. Their air defenses are stretched. Their proxies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen are scattered, depleted, or in some cases politically isolated from Tehran's direction. Their ceasefire leverage is shattered. The Gulf Cooperation Council, Egypt, and Kuwait have all condemned them in writing within 24 hours of the strike. China is quietly funneling dual-use materials according to reporting in the New York Times, but Beijing is hedging, not committing. Russia is bleeding men and equipment in Ukraine and has nothing to spare. Iran is increasingly alone. And the regime in Tehran, watching the Iron Dome interceptors light up the sky over Abu Dhabi, watching Project Freedom, escorts mass off the coast of Oman, watching schools shift to remote learning across the Emirates from May 5th through May 8th, watching 3 of its own cruise missiles fall harmlessly into the Persian Gulf, has to be asking itself one question. What happens when the ceasefire ends, not because Tehran chose, but because Washington and Tel Aviv decide that restraint is no longer worth it? The answer to that could reshape the entire Persian Gulf for a generation, and the window to find out is closing fast. That is the reality the Persian Gulf is waking up to today. The Iron Dome that fired over Arab skies for the first time. The pipeline that was supposed to make Fujairah safe. The ADNOC tanker burning off the coast of Oman. The 15,000 American troops moving in. Stay subscribed to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the breakdown when the next move comes. We'll see you on the next one.